Welcome back, everybody, to our Wednesday Energy Talk here on Skype Live. My name is Jona Bryndis. I'm an energy healer, energy coach, and trainer for other energy healers. And I want to talk to you about these March energies that are coming in with a lot of these fast-paced collective energies that we all need to contend with, that we all need to work with here in these next 4 to 6 weeks. And use this as an example for part 3 of our Food for Our Soul series here that we've started 2 weeks ago. So we've talked about, this is the context, what feeds our soul, and we went through different aspects of it, like how we can feed all the other, levels of ourselves, our body, our emotion, our mind. And we're now at a point where, we're recognizing that feeding our spirit is something that we often underestimate. And there's several aspects. So go back to part 1 and part 2. It's very beautiful sharing, guys. And thank you for coming here live and participating. Today, the subject is more pragmatic, and that is, how can we deal with these apocalypse type of energy that are coming in, these doomsday energies. There's a new term in psychology. It's called doomsday scrolling as a new form of addiction. One of the contributors to people having difficulty sleeping because they have this addiction to scrolling, the social media or news, in order to kind of catch up with all the things that are happening in the world. And that's, for many of you energetically sensitives and empaths, old news, that this isn't really good for you. But we are getting really good at understanding what is not good for us, but we're not really that good yet in discerning what actually is good for us and how to feel this, how to discern this. And right here is where the forecast for March comes in. I don't know if you guys all had an opportunity to watch it yet. So I'm talking about something in there that has to do with feeding energies in us. Do you guys remember this part? It's obviously very in-depth energy analysis, but I go into like what these negative and fear-based thoughts, what they look like energetically. There's a part where I say, if you could see what I see. I don't mean to make this special. What I mean with this is, if it was more aware to us, what in our life determines, the energies that we have as currency to live life, as basically life force available to us and ability to discern, we would be a lot more careful with it. Okay, why am I saying this? Because we're looking at an energetic environment right now, which I called a very sort of high manifesting energy field, the field of all possibilities, which means that everything that we feed into this collective mind field, which as energy workers, we call this the etheric field. The etheric field, that is the mirror version of all our thoughts, emotions, actions, and sentiments. That is tied to our energy body as individuals, but also to the collective as a whole. And you can imagine that part is relatively linear. The more people are honing in on the same kind of thought or sentiment, the stronger, the quality of this field is influenced. So the more amplified it is. So there is, I think, it's safe to say, a very, very strong fear energy in our collective right now. Who feels this? who feels this. It's like a free floating anxiety. It's like just about everything in a way. Do you guys feel this too? Like you can't trust the government, you can't trust the doctors, you can't trust the banks, you can't trust, the politicians, okay? And, climate change is going to destroy the planet, and the Great Reset is going to destroy the economy and whatnot, right? It's everything is kind of gearing toward, triggering this kind of fear energy in us. And I want to use this opportunity with you live here to discuss this a little more, to really think this all the way through and maybe even feel this all the way through. Can you identify what it actually is in us humans that is reacting, that is responding to those kind of doomsday messaging that is there? Let's put all conspiracy theories aside. I don't want to discuss why and who and no, I just want to talk about the effects. Yeah, let's not get wrapped up in causation. Let's just talk about the phenomenon, what we can experience ourselves, the things that we are perceiving. What gets triggered in us when there's so much distrust and so much sort of end of everything messaging out there? What do you guys think? And please feel free to share into the microphone, because in the video we can't see the text. Sean is responding here in the chat, inner child fears. Okay, let's go there for a moment. Let's describe, let's characterize what inner child fears are. What's one of the main characteristics of inner child fears? And Sean, why are you calling it inner child fears? What's different with inner child fears than with inner grown-up fears? Not being enough. Okay, not being enough. What, to face all this, or specify a little more? Not feeling protected, which is a very childlike state. A child feels intrinsically powerless because it cannot protect itself. It has to rely, it depends on, the support structure of parents and so forth. So that one makes it feel like inner childlike. Yes, not, feeling overwhelmed, right? That's what you mean with, not good enough to face all this, to face all this at once, especially, yes, because it feels really difficult to fathom it all and to even know what could be done, right? There is no sort of guidance that says, okay, well, let's slow down a minute and let's look at what we have here. Okay, first we're going to do this, then this, then this, then this. So typically children don't feel that way. Children just get overwhelmed by the experience and then, get scared, start crying, start hiding, right? Throwing a tantrum. Yeah. So I agree with you that it feels or reminds of a certain level of powerlessness that the child or the inner child in us can feel. But there's another characteristic of this inner child fear. Anyone who's ever worked with children or has children knows what I mean. How realistic are our children's inner children or our children's fears? There's something about the quality of the fears when one feels overwhelmed or when one just simply doesn't have that much experience with something. When one faces the unknown. How realistic are those fears? Think of inner child fears, of children's fears. The boogeyman, the monster in the closet, I don't know, getting hit by lightning, getting chased by a shark. How probable are those fears that come from that part in us that is overwhelmed, that feels powerless? Do we say, yeah, you should be afraid of them? Yes, compared to the dinosaur, the shark, you're just so little and there's nothing you can do and you should be afraid. Do we say that to a child that is in fear? No. Why not, Anita?
I think it will not help them.
No.
You have to calm them down.
Exactly. It will not help them, and worse, it'll make it worse. Because the true nature of those fears, if you think about it, is irrational, right? Getting eaten by a shark. I mean, I live in Florida and there's a lot of sharks here. This actually happens to people here, but still, how likely is it that I'm getting eaten by a shark if I don't go out there every day and surf out in the ocean? How likely is it going to happen? It's very unlikely. So it's an irrational thought. It's an irrational fear. Because there's a choice part in this, right? I can only get eaten by a shark if I choose to expose myself to sharks all the time, isn't that? What is it in us that takes off and goes into this irrationality with our fears? What is the origin of our fears, guys? Do you know why this is such an important question, especially in times like this? Because the only way how you can learn to overcome your fears is to know your fears and to understand the origin of them. It is not where they're coming from. When I say the origin, it's where they originate in you. What is it in us that reacts or responds to these 93% of completely unlikely things to happen? That we allow it to dominate our life. Okay, yes, Sean, part of that is our past experience. Yeah. So if we actually have been struck by lightning, or if we actually know someone who has been eaten by a shark or witnessed it, well, our memory says, yeah, that is, it has happened. I know, I can feel it in my bones. Okay, I remember it. It's true. We call this trauma. And trauma stores itself in our cells, in our bones, in our cell structure. Okay? Which means we have a physiological response. Yeah, physical and, on a neurotransmitter level, on a biochemical level, that then triggers emotions in us that then feed the thoughts. So those emotions, those fear emotions that come up, they feed the fears, the thoughts. But the origin is in the thought. So first came the thought, I could get eaten by a shark. Then comes the physiological response. Then comes the emotion. And the emotion goes like, no, I don't want this. No, no, no. Okay? And then comes more thoughts. And that creates this cycle. Yeah, we call this the body mind, where it becomes very difficult for us to distinguish if it is a physiological, an emotional, or a cognitive issue that we're dealing with, because it's all kind of one. They are intrinsically connected with another: body, mind, emotion. Yes, and Syria, you keep going back to where it came from originally, and this is not a bad idea to investigate that. But before we investigate what outer influences are, promoting this, I would like to continue to investigate what in us reacts and what it actually is that we need to tackle, that we need to overcome. Yes, and you're absolutely right. This was the answer that I was looking for. It is ultimately the mother of all fears that is underneath that, and that is the fear of death. The fear of death is a programmed fear in us. It needs to be there. Why do we need to have a fear of death, guys? Do you know why? Yeah, to keep us alive. How does our fear of death keep us alive? Well, it does that via another program that we call ego. Yeah, it's a program installed in our psyche, okay, that is linked to our five senses. Yeah, it's a program that monitors. It's like a security software that monitors a potential threat. So it takes something that we see, and then it anticipates, yeah, what comes next. It's basically, if you think back to like prehistoric times where we had to just kind of, try to survive, yeah, in a rough environment, yeah, where we had to had enough food and shelter, like a cave or something, and where every morning, or even in the middle of the night, some kind of like wild animal, bear or a lion or whatever could come and eat us. Okay, so our ego is the one that helps us to evaluate, okay, the chances of, our fears, our fear of dying to come true. Now, let me ask you, what does your ego say? If you're afraid of getting eaten by sharks, what is your ego going to tell you about going out surfing every day out in the ocean where there's lots of sharks? What does your ego say? Yep, it says, no way, Jose, I'm not going to go out there, right? It makes you want to avoid. Exactly. It makes you want to avoid the very thing that your ego identifies as at least a very high likelihood. Yes, and it makes you scared. Yes. The problem then with becoming scared is that this part is something that we often cannot control that well. Our ego, Sean, does not really help us to discern truth. This is the whole point of the talk. Our ego reacts to markers, to just very simple cues that, because of this body-mind reaction, yeah, body, emotion, and thoughts linked together in form of this ego program, programmed to react to threats, cannot discern truth. It cannot discern whether you watching the movie Jaws, or you guys all know the movie Jaws, right? The big great white shark, that is chasing that family in I think Florida it actually is. So when you watch a movie like this, you cannot discern whether this is just a movie or whether this is actually happening to you. Is this true, this statement? Who of you gets really sweaty hands, gets a really strong physiological reaction when watching graphic movies, or, things that trigger this fear? Yeah. Okay. And who gets emotionally pulled into movies? Yes. And Syria, your ego says, oh, I'm not going to watch any movies. Yeah, because that's why it says don't watch. Because you get pulled into things, yeah, that you may not want to get pulled into. So the reason why I wanted to investigate this with you is because the ego cannot discern whether it's true or not. The ego just reacts. It's like a fail-safe, if you will. Yeah, it's not supposed to think. It's not supposed to discern. It's just supposed to react. That's why I call it, our insurance policy, because in such moments where you actually get chased by a shark or whatever, a lion, you're not supposed to think, because thinking takes too long. You're supposed to react. There should not be thinking in between. You don't have the time. Okay, you need to get your body out of there. Okay, so if you think too long about it, you're already dead. That's why the ego is so reactive, hyper-reactive. And the problem with all these impulses that come in from the outside is that if these impulses trigger your ego to respond with this fight, flight, or freeze, worst case scenario, then now this is happening to you, whether it is real or realistic or true or not, it is happening to you. Who's ever scrolled or watched the news and came out of just watching this frustrated or scared or confused or stressed? Yeah. Yes, we all do. So we're still trying to figure out how to overcome this and how to develop an antidote to this. So we know that there's a physiological function in us, called ego, which is there for our physical survival, regulating our psyche, attuning it to threats. So we are programmed to react to threats. But is there also something in us that can counteract that? That's the question. And that answer would lead us to how to overcome our fears. But before we keep going into like how we can counteract it and overcome our fear, let's now investigate the nature of where all these fears are coming from. Okay, so there's a certain number of fears that we all have, and that's why inner child was a very good answer, because we grow up with certain fears, and some things are more scary to you than they are to you or me. Okay, some of it has to do with our past experiences and our memories. And, some of it just has to do with, where we grow up. Yeah, so if we grow up in an environment where there is a lot of violence, say, we'll have a different way of looking at threats than someone who grows up, sort of in a little, silver spoon bubble. You guys understand what I'm saying, right? Someone who has, a lot of sort of adverse exposure will develop a certain level of resilience over time. So this is another function that our ego has, is that it actually allows us to adjust. It allows us to get used to a certain level of threat if we are exposed to it, and over time become more experienced, more mature, a little bit calmer. That function can also work against us if we are being exposed to too much adversity. Yeah, if it's too much violence, too much trauma, too much abuse, okay, then our ego can also sort of just kind of be so overwhelmed that it just checks out. It just wants to check out. It accepts, that level of threat as normal. Yeah, it just says, okay, the world out there is hostile. Okay, and I'm not going to expose myself to anything. I'm just checking out. Yeah, I'm choosing to escape from it. Yeah, because it's too stressful for me. So this is part of our ego's function as well. But let's look at what these external influences are. Siri, you already mentioned a few here. You said TV, movies. Okay. What else, guys? I mean, I mentioned a few. Social media. Let's investigate the messaging. What do you think here in 2023 is the main messaging, the main messages that are being transported to us? Not just in the news, but also in movies, music? What do you see? What do you feel as the energetic quality of the messaging? Yes, other apps as well. And not low and high, the nature of it. The nature of it. What does it transport to us? What does it trigger in us? Does it scary? Yes. Isolation, aloneness. Yes. Me. The gain, maximum self-gain. What else? I think it's more than just scary. I think it's more than just fear. Yes, Annette, powerlessness. I think right now, especially if you think of like the younger generation, what are they being told about the world? They're basically being told that, well, our generation, I guess, and our parents' generation have really messed us up, and that there is, everything coming to an end, that everything is gearing toward the end of all things. Powerlessness. So let's switch back now to the energetic aspect of things. Which part of you do you think gets fed by powerlessness? Your heart and soul, or your ego? Yeah. So when outer conditions are such way that it triggers powerlessness, and with it the fear of dying, the fear of death. Humans, the majority of humans, the untrained human, untrained conscious human, will almost have no other choice than respond with their ego program to it. Now let's recall, what is the ego program? What are the paradigms of ego? 2 paradigms. Avoiding and seeking Those are the 2 paradigms of ego. Avoiding what? Seeking what? Yeah, it has to do with safe. Yep, avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. That's the ego paradigm. Yes, wonderful. Okay, so now that we understand our own ego just a little better, and we understand the nature of the environment, the conditions, so what we are exposed to, okay, now we're getting close to discernment. We're getting to the point where we can actually better understand what it is that even needs to be overcome. What is your best guess? In order to not go nuts, in order to not feel isolated, let down, abandoned, neglected, like a powerless child, what needs to be overcome? What do we need to overcome, guys? And how can we do that? Yeah, seeking approval is part of the ego paradigm. How can we overcome that? I mean, the more fear, guys, the more the fear of death is triggered in you, the stronger the ego paradigm will grip, to a point where you're no longer able to actually make rational decisions. You cannot see rationality, that your prefrontal cortex is not involved in your decision-making process. It is only the lower developed, brain stem here, the amygdala, that part of your processing that makes decisions. That's where fight, flight, or freeze are located in. If you don't want to live a life in fight, flight, or freeze, you need to learn how to overcome that. How can we overcome fear? All right, this is what we're doing right now. We're analyzing these things, using our higher thinking to actually face what it is that scares us, so that we can learn what it actually is that does that to us, so that we can learn to form an antidote in us, change our way of thinking, change our way of approaching a situation. Yes, very beautiful. So our perspective, our perception, and our way, how we contextualize things, how we think about it, our life view. Okay. But how easy is that? How many people do you know that are willing to change their worldview? Their way of thinking? Not many. Yeah. So we're coming in too high. You have to recognize that, this ego program that is running in us is so low, really, in energetic and cognitive quality. Okay, that you can't really go in there with, sort of what would or should be right. You need to, pick yourself up where you're at. If your fear of dying is the biggest fear that triggers all the other fears, how can you counteract that? Besides, staying away from as much as you can from this outer messaging. How can you develop your own antidote if fear of dying is the core, the mother of all other fears in you and all your ego's reactions? Stay in the body, okay, but there's a problem with staying in the body, Sean. If the fear is already gripping, okay, yeah, then you already have a bodily reaction to it. Okay, you are no longer in control of your body. Yeah, your nervous system took over. You got sweaty hands, you got a heart racing. Yeah, you got all kinds of adrenaline shooting through your system. You're no longer in control of your body. Yeah, your body is part of the program, of the ego program. And plus, isn't it the body that is getting you into trouble in the first place? Because what is the nature of our fear of death? What is it? What are we afraid of? What is our ego afraid of? What is the ego's department? It's the physical survival. We're afraid of losing our physical survival. Okay? The loss of everything. Okay. So let's investigate that statement. Are we losing everything? Yes, we're afraid that death is the end. The end of what? The end of our existence? If we have just as much as an inkling, okay, that we are a soul being, yeah, a spirit being that is having a physical experience, is the fear of death really the biggest problem? Or is the fear of losing this physical life, the end of this physical life, really the biggest problem we're dealing with? So really the resolution of this is that we remind ourselves that we are not just a physical body. So it is the materialism, yeah, this soul reduction to a material being that is messaged to us from the outside, and that is sort of amplified within ourselves, that pulls us into a fear of death. The antidote to that is to feed the part in us that is not dependent on the physical body. Which part in us is not dependent on the physical body? Yes, Matthew, thank you. Yes, Annette, our soul. So if our physical experience right now, it's not always the case, but right now collectively, I think we can state that, feeds us with the fear of our own existence, our own physical existence, wouldn't it make sense, yeah, to feed the part in us that knows that we are not dependent on this physical existence? This is why we soothe children and say, honey, it's okay. I understand your fear. But look, the boogeyman really isn't important. I mean, some parents say it doesn't exist or something like that. Yeah. In the same way, we can say to ourselves, or I can say to you, honey, Don't be afraid of, the end of your physical existence. It's not really what matters. You're just dreaming right now. It's just a dream. What matters is that you learn to balance that you learn to regulate that, to master that, so that you do not, and this is the part here that I wanted to send you home with, so that you don't become fodder, food for the dark forces out there that feed us with the fear of death, the fear of the end of the physical experience. Those are entities, guys. They look like demons, and these demons can actually get a foothold in you if you are feeding your fears. If you cannot master that a part of your being, your ego. So the biggest task for us humans here is to learn how to master our ego and all its addictions, because that is what allows us to overcome our fears. And when we overcome our fears, then we can discern. And the way we do this, guys, is, yes, and I know you all know this, is through slowing down, through connecting with our heart, through breathing, through using positive imagery and loving and beautiful thoughts, things that reinforce the good and the beautiful and, the miraculousness of this physical experience back to your soul. So feeding our soul, guys, that happens through the alignment to the good, the beautiful, the truth, the freedom, the light. That is the antidote to fear. Okay? So remember, when you feed your soul, these demons, these entities that are all around us and in us in some cases, they starve when you are not afraid. They starve when you feed your soul. But when you feed your fears and your ego, they get bigger and fatter and more controlling in your life. So maybe this is a visualization. It's a bit graphic, but it's a visualization that helps you to motivate yourself to not invest, to not feed your fears more than they are already present. Yeah, we cannot obviously fully prevent ourselves from experiencing, a fear of death, because that's programmed into us, but it is just a program. We have a higher level, we have a higher pay grade in us, and that is the one that created the program. Yeah, the I am awareness that links us into our soul self-awareness. Yeah, that's the programmer. Yeah, so become the programmer of your life, okay? Not just the app that executes it. You're not an app, you're not a machine, you're not a computer. You are a living, organic spirit being, okay, that can link into co-creative energies. Very, very powerful. Yeah, and I want to leave you off here with something that you can use as a reminder when you go to my website. So this is what it looks like when you go to my website. I don't know if you guys have seen this. There is a tab up here, a new tab that's called Energy Calendar. And when you go to it, so it logs you into your account, then you can see the energetic quality of our collective field for every day in the month. And when you hover over these little black spots here, you can see little messages that I have put in here for you that remind you of, how you can manifest more soul food in you, how you can turn this around. Okay? So this is the visualization here for today, guys. Yeah, you have to consciously work with this, or else this program will take over. Yeah, it's a very strong program right now. And, for the next 3 years or so, this will be, our continued spiritual effort, okay, to educate ourselves about our ego, to learn about its addictions and these hardwired mechanisms that it executes, yeah, and how to develop an antidote, yeah, self-healing antidote within yourself that can help you to overcome your fear and develop the courage to change your views, change your perspective, your approach, whatever is needed to deal and respond to all these changes that we are experiencing right now with your higher expression and not with your lower expression, yeah, with those fear-based programs in you. Any questions before I let you go? If you have questions to the forecast of March, use the commentary on YouTube, and I will always respond. And obviously you can reach me on my email, my website, or on Skype. Stay conscious, everyone. See you soon.